Thanks for joining us, everyone, and thank you for staying to listen. What we're going to do is start with everyone explaining a bit about your background and your thoughts on the opportunities and threats to global trade. So I'll start with you, Sam. You want to give the audience a bit of background about your operation?
Sure. So my name's Sam Burton-Taylor. I'm from Boorowa, New South Wales, which is about an hour and a half north of Canberra. We run 3 farms. We've got composite sheep, which we're breeding for carcass, for marbling, and we've only been that for a few years. And then we've also got an Angus stud and commercial Angus herd. Probably about 12, 13 years ago, when I was coming back to the farm, we bought the butcher shop, and I did my trade as an apprentice butcher with a view to getting into the meat industry. And since then, we did the domestic, like we did retail, we did wholesale, and we did home delivery. And I heard the girls speaking a little bit, 4 daughters earlier, about some of their experiences, and ours has been very similar, particularly on the retail side and the home delivery. And we were just at a time where it was very hard to get to that scale that we needed, and that last kilometre of delivery was very hard. So in the last few years, the last 10 years, we've been exporting beef and lamb. We were very fortunate to find our way into China at a time when there was a lot of opportunity to kind of go into that market. And since then, we've kind of diversified into other markets. And so we also run a feedlot at Forbes where we feed cattle out to kind of 150 days, and we process those cattle on that. And most of those in the last couple of years have been going direct into supermarkets in China. It's been our primary market, and then we've found other markets around those.
Excellent. And Beth?
Yeah, thank you. It's a real pleasure to be with you this morning. I have stepped in at short notice for Nicola Hinder, who is the Deputy Secretary of our Ag Trade Group. And Nicola has asked me to pass on her apologies for not being able to attend today's panel discussion. She, unfortunately, her flight to Osaka, which we would all agree is a very important place for her to be, was rescheduled, so she's waiting to depart right now. She did also ask me to pass on her thanks to the NFF for supporting the department's position of promoting a no one-size-fits-all approach to agricultural sustainability, which she recently presented at the FAO's Global Conference on Sustainable Livestock Transformation. So why I am here, I'm Beth Cookson. I'm the Acting Australian Chief Veterinary Officer. I've been with the department for around 18 years now, and I've held several positions throughout that time, including as the head of our Animal Biosecurity branch, which is responsible for negotiating import policy in accordance with our World Trade Organisation obligations, and also representing that to trading partners. More recently, in the Office of the Chief Veterinary Officer, we hold responsibility for representing Australia's animal health status and the systems that underpin it to support our favourable market access into global trade networks, and also in providing input into international standard setting processes. So we do have a lot of touch points with our trade colleagues, and also in the biosecurity space. So I just wanted to touch on a few points this morning, just by way of introduction, and give a bit of a flavour of the department's perspective on it. Of course, we've heard about the macro trends. I won't cover those, but we do know that the cost of agricultural inputs and freight prices have really put pressure on our markets, and we are continuing to see increasing global food insecurity and the impacts that has on driving our market opportunities. I think Michael's talk touched on some of the changes that we're seeing in terms of the trade dynamics, and so I can't help but take the opportunity to link that back to also what we're seeing in the biosecurity environment and the changing distribution of pests and diseases and the threats that places on Australian agriculture. And just some of the examples there include the risk of pests and diseases moving closer through our neighbouring regions, and natural pathways that exist into areas of Northern Australia, which, unfortunately, for all of the best regulation in the world at the border means that we don't always have control over the arrival of some of these pests and diseases. And also with the increasing sort of cargo volumes around hitchhiker pests arriving through cargo. Some of the challenges, I guess, in the space that we play with ag trade include the increasing threats to the global rules-based order. I talked about international standards setting before. So in terms of some of the challenges around working in that transparent way around ensuring that non-tariff barriers are managed and that we are working in the global environment around key topics including sustainability and how we represent our production systems to make sure that they remain globally competitive. So I might stop there for now. Thank you very much.
We will come back to quite a few of those topics in our discussion later. Thank you very much, Beth, for that. And Shiro.
Hi, so I'm Shiro Armstrong. I'm here at the ANU in the Crawford School of Public Policy. It's a real pleasure to join this panel and to speak to you all today. I spend my time worrying about the Asian economies and the global trading system. And I got a glimpse of your presentation, Michael, and share the same worries, really. I spend a lot of time on the ground in Japan, Indonesia, a bit in China, but around the region and a bit in the United States. And, you know, I think everywhere we're now concerned with uncertainty and inward-looking policies that really threaten our prosperity, our collective prosperity, but also our security. So thinking through how to keep markets open, how to keep them open, not just to keep ourselves prosperous and doing well, pretty big development challenges still, of course, in the region, but also how to keep us more secure by doing so. So the trajectory we're on, and I'm sure we'll come back to this with US-China strategic competition, is a really worrying one that seems to be just constantly getting worse, and it's empowering all the wrong elements in all our economies, I think, all our countries. So it is a time of worry, but hopefully we can talk a little bit about some of the solutions too.
Excellent. So with our discussion, Michael, anyone in the room that was listening to your presentation probably couldn't now say that there's a sense of optimism when we're looking at global trade. Perhaps the only place you're seeing that are in the headlines, in places like the Weekly Times saying, you know, we're potentially tariffs are dropping in China and there's some EU trade deals and other trade deals in the works. Do you think that there is any danger of industry being lulled into a false sense of security through trade deals?
A false sense of security between whom, sorry?
Between Australian trade and our global partners, our export partners. Is there any danger in us taking our eye off what really needs to be done or thinking that there's a positive outlook right now?
Well, to answer that question, if I can just repeat very briefly, as global strategist, my job is to be like sand and to be rough and irritating and everywhere, and not to be normative in terms of how I would like the world to be, but to try and predict how I think the world will be, because that's the only way that you can really hedge your risks. And there are reasons for limited optimism in some sectors, in some geographies, because when things collapse, it's not as if everything just goes flat and there is nothing there. They shift and morph into new shapes. So there are upsides in every downside. There are opportunities with every risk and every threat. But in order to do that, you need to be very to embrace that totality. You need to be very flexible in your thinking. If you want to, try and maintain what we have had up until recently, I think, you're in for disappointment rather than any kind of excitement or happiness.
Excellent. Shiro, what's your take on the strategic rivalry between the US and China, and how do you see that shaping the future of Australia going forward?
Yeah, look, I think, the big powers acting like big powers and sort of ignoring the rules when it suits them. Now, we've had a really long stretch since the end of the Second World War where we've had a strong trading system, the GATT that became the WTO, that's really separated economics from security, but it's now all getting entangled in a messy way. That's got to do with the competition for primacy, but the competition that the United States and China are locked into is a zero-sum competition, right? So one sees the gain by the other as a loss to themselves. And that, when they start trashing the trading rules that we rely on, we should be worried, as in we, the rest of the world. We depend on the rules-based trading system. And I think, I heard some of your talk earlier, Michael, we should be worried about what the Chinese and the Russians are doing. I'm pretty worried about what the United States is doing too. They went from enforcer of the system to now spoiler. So the WTO can't enforce trade rules because of the United States. And they're dealing with domestic challenges, pretty big domestic challenges that are preoccupying them. So this is where I think we need to act collectively. So Australia, we've got a lot of friends, in fact the rest of the world really, in keeping this system open and rules-based. And so that's where we need to be putting our effort. And that's our best line of defense against these sort of trade sanctions, other economic weaponry, having an open system where we can divert our exports. We can find substitutes in the international market. So I've put a lot into that, but I think this is, the strategic competition is threatening the system that we rely on.
And so when you are talking about diverting, do you have any thoughts on where Australia really should be focusing? We've talked about diversification when China all of a sudden became not an option overnight for a huge number of commodities, and then diversification was on the agenda. Has it slipped, or if we are still looking at that, where should we be looking?
Well, I think I'll be interested to hear what the rest of the panel has to say on this, but I don't know that we should be picking markets in that way. I know we're doing agreements with India that we've concluded and we're upgrading, the European Union obviously, but our barley exporters, for example, didn't know before they were blocked in China which markets would open up and be available. So you wouldn't want to limit the world by going towards sort of friendshoring or trusted trade. You want to keep all options open, and I think we need to keep our eye on the game, which is the WTO, and all the arrangements that are built on top of that. So they're not substitutes for the multilateral system, they're complements, and they're much needed. Just making sure that, that's a big backstop against protectionism in all our economies, the WTO, and it's weak and under threat, but it's still functioning.
Right, we'll come back to that later, because that is a talking point on whether it is, if everyone agrees that it's still functioning and still relevant. But Beth, can you tell us about advances in trade ties with places like the UK and India, and whether that is a good news story in addition to what we've seen in China returning?
Yeah, thanks for the question. And I absolutely agree with Shiro's comments about complementary activities to support the work that we do in the multilateral fora and at the bilateral level in terms of markets. Just to provide a little bit of background to some of the work that we have been undertaking, as you would have seen, the government has reached an agreement on a pathway toward resolving the WTO dispute with China on bottled wine. And so that has been good news, and it reflects the significant work from government and industry, building on the recent news about barley and updates for other commodities. So they're clearly positive steps, but our focus does remain on the removal of all trade impediments. So we need to be making those opportunities for all markets and commodities, especially in the China example, live lobster and suspended meat establishments. You mentioned India. So this year we have achieved market access for Haas avocados to India, which industry estimates could be worth around $25 million. And we're working to finalise open trade following the completion of trial shipments in September. And building closer economic ties with India to realise the gains from the Australia-India Economic Cooperation and Trade Agreement. And we're looking for all of those opportunities to build on those agreements when they become available. The UK, I think, has been one of the most comprehensive and ambitious free trade agreements that we've seen. And within 10 years of entry into force, tariffs on all agricultural goods will be completely eliminated. And that does open opportunities for market access for other emerging industries like First Nations, novel foods. It provides an opportunity for increased collaboration on agricultural issues that are important to both Australia and UK, including animal welfare, antimicrobial resistance and sustainability. And of course, those types of issues we're seeing more and more in this narrative around trade agreements. And so whilst there is opportunity for cooperation, it also it comes in the form of NTBs if we're not really careful about how we manage those.
Excellent. Sam, do you want to run through exactly what the situation now is for your business, where you're sending product, but also how that's changed and sort of why that would have changed over time?
I think, that for us, China's like a forbidden fruit. It's something that, we saw it through, remember friends, and there's been a lot of negative comments, particularly in our community around the Chinese involvement. But in the 2018-2019 drought, our prices were strong, and a lot of that was purely because of China. And so we still have a large dependence in our business on China, and we've been lucky to be able to kind of navigate our way through 3 plant closures, which, whatever you want to call them, that they've been politically influenced, and through COVID. And so China has been our baseline, and we've needed the prices that they pay to be able to support the livestock, and we're a service processor, so we don't have the advantage of having our own abattoir, and so we have to be able to kind of absorb some more costs in our production system, and we get through that by getting a better price. And so for us, China has been a really important thing, but we've also in our business obviously tried to diversify away from that, and the US, Middle East, and other Asian countries have been strong. I think, just to diverge slightly, the opportunity for us now as beef and lamb producers is for our big 4, which is US, China, Korea and Japan, to come back online. And when our market is firing, those four markets are all competing against each other. And I think the situation we're in now with livestock prices, which is affecting us all badly, is that all these markets are failing. China is lacklustre. Japan's been lacklustre for us for some time, and probably don't expect them to come back. Korea's at the top end of their market. They're processing a lot of their Hanwoo cattle, which is affecting premium meats coming out of Australia. And the US has had ample supply because they've been in drought, and I'll touch on that again later. But I think for us, like the opportunities that are coming for us now, to answer your question, will be from those big 4. There are niche markets where there's opportunities, definitely, but those markets will be really strong for us.
Excellent. So for other people who don't know exactly what the ins and outs of you getting to that export stage are in your business, can you explain some of the difficulties that you face just to get your products into market, and the challenges to establishing markets in the first place?
Yeah, so I think there's, we aspired, and my wife often chides me for saying this, but we aspired to be a vertically integrated business, and the risk with that is that everything that we're trying to do is so, each of the functions in the supply chain are so fundamentally different, whether it's breeding cattle, backgrounding cattle, feeding cattle, or processing, and then getting into the export and sales. And so for us, it's been a big education process, and I heard the 4 Daughters team talking about that earlier. It's a tough world out there, and there's guys, it can be a bloodbath, and when things turn, and they turn quickly, overnight you get a phone call that we've lost China access, and you've got product, you might have, 40, 50, 60 tonnes of meat on the water. All of a sudden you've got to find homes for that product. And so the challenges are diverse, and part of that is the volume that you have to trade at to get to that supply level, and that can be hard, and also the consistency of supply that you need to meet that demand. You can't just be once a month or once every 2 months, or as your cattle come off your farm and ready to go. You have to be week in, week out supplying into those markets to maintain consistency.
Excellent. Now, I'm going to intersect my own question here, because I think this is something that will seg nicely back to you, Beth. Are there other challenges and threats domestically within our supply chain that you also worry about? Like, we've talked about China shutting things down, but there are plenty of things that can happen here that would also shut things down. And do you think we've got the settings right on those things?
Definitely not. I was just saying to Beth a little bit earlier that we've had experiences even in the last few months, the things that weren't even on my risk spectrum in terms of things that we had to manage, And so the real challenge for processors in Australia is understanding that we want to be part of a high-value supply chain. I get the sentiment that we're not there at the moment. Like, our beef is actually cheaper than Brazilian beef at the moment, which has never happened in our lifetimes. And I think that for the average farmer, he's got to understand that you put an HGP in an animal's ear, that animal goes through to production, that can affect the whole market, not just the processor, or in my case, the service processor, the abattoir establishment that's coming out, but also to the market that we're going to. And I think everyone's pretty aware about China and how sensitive they've been, and they're kind of they're a nation that seems to have a glass jaw, and easily get thrown off, and we can suffer huge consequences. And so that's of great concern to me, and particularly because it's something I've got no control over.
So Beth, going to you, the department has put a lot of energy into digitizing export processors and making things simpler for exporters. Is that making a difference? But also, and I know your focus specifically is on biosecurity and those protocols, and are we doing enough in that space to ensure we're maintaining our market access at all times?
Yeah, really good question. I might just sort of touch briefly on Sam's comments before going into the question about digitising export processes, and the importance of having really strong linkages, business to business, industry to industry, and government to government. And we've certainly seen that through the recent trade disruption with Indonesia around the lumpy skin disease concerns. I mean, this was a disease that we didn't even have. We're very confident that we don't have lumpy skin disease. We've got very good animal health systems. We've got very good surveillance systems, and we're easily able to collect that data and provide that evidence. And really what that came down to was a very collective effort across the supply chain to use all of the angles that we could together to make sure that we had the information and that we were sort of able to provide that in a timely way to help resume that trade. So I think that sort of was just one highlight around the awareness that we need to maintain across the supply chain, and the importance of some of those relationships we've got. I mean, in the department's case, we've got agricultural counsellors. We've got about 20 counsellors now in around 16 markets, and they're absolutely essential from my perspective, and making sure that we've got that on the ground intelligence that we can respond to early when we know that there's sort of emerging concerns around specific issues. Just in terms of the digitising processes, I guess, are we seeing that make a difference? You probably need to ask exporters whether those systems are simplifying things. I mean, we'd certainly like to believe that they are making a big difference and that they will make a long-term difference through that investment. A couple of examples that I could point to is the implementation of the new export documentation system that we love acronyms in government, so we fondly refer to that as NextDoc. And we've transitioned dairy in 2021, as well as expanding to honey and apiculture exports for 50 markets. And just the examples of how that sort of does, I guess, facilitate and reduce the cost of trade. Because, I mean, we're talking about the cost of inputs, right, to how trade is facilitated. So everything that the government can do to try to reduce the cost of the regulation over that contributes to a more sustainable agricultural sector. So that's reducing paper burdens, it's reducing processing times, and reducing the cost of how those certificates work. I did mention before international standards. So often certification is the subject to discussion through international standards. So one of the roles we have is also to make sure that they're compatible with our systems and interests. We've certainly had examples of where a system's been implemented internationally, and all of a sudden we've got products stuck at borders and things like that. And also, just a quick plug, I know you want to move on, for the export service system. There is some more information on the department's website, but basically it's making sure that there's a single view around market opportunities in those systems. So,
Excellent.
Could I just say, and I think one of the frustrating things from a farmer's perspective, and you look back at this year and there's just been a negative news cycle as soon as, and I've heard people saying just don't turn on the radio, don't look at BOM, but you go back to February, March this year and we were talking about lumpy skin and we're talking about foot and mouth, and it was not if it was going to happen, it was when. And from a farmer's perspective, you talk about the cost of inputs and all those sort of things, that is actually what cost us this year. Like that downturn that we experienced in the first part of this year, which was just on hype, and it's because we've got weak political systems in place and trade agreements where if there's one case of lumpy skin disease in Western Australia, the whole of us are shut out. And so we are hugely vulnerable from a disease perspective, but also from a communication perspective, because no one could explain to us back then exactly how this year would go, and everyone, look, it just seems like everyone's been off the money.
Shiro, you've got thoughts on this. You're nodding away, and yeah.
Well, I think I just want to come back to something Sam said earlier. The Chinese being very sensitive, and we've had obviously some pretty big challenges with the Chinese market, and this relates to actually the number of questions popping up on Slido
Yes,
that look
we're
really
looking at
interesting. I think these shocks will happen, whether they're politically motivated or not, from the global system, and they're going to accelerate anyway because of climate change and rising geopolitical tensions. I think the government has taken the right view with trying to open up other markets and putting agreements in place. What we want to avoid, and what the temptation is to try to restrict the ability to trade with China or other unfriendly quote-unquote countries. I think that's a huge mistake. I think farmers can take the risk and diversify themselves or self-insure. We don't want the government to be stopping that. But also, I think from a broader strategic perspective, this relates to the question about economic integration providing security.
Yep.
A Chinese economy and society that's less integrated into the global system, I think, is one with more risks. I think, it does raise the costs of conflict to have economic integration, but also the constraints on not just Chinese, but any government when you're integrated into the global market are quite significant and constrain you away from the worst of your sort of political spectrum and temptation to intervene there. So, the question really is about how we can break away from this fixation or I'd say probably domination of security, the security imperative over the economic imperative. That's very hard when the world is looking more uncertain, insecure, and with rising tensions. But, we're being pushed into false choices of China or the United States, economics versus security. These are all false choices that I think we want to be able to preserve options. And to do that, I think it's a return to prioritising the multilateral system, working with other countries to keep those options open.
All right, actually, let's talk about that multilateral system since you're on it. You think that the WTO is still relevant, it's a weakened system, but it's something we should back. Let's discuss that, and Michael, I'd be interested on your view on that as well.
I just disagree very strongly.
Okay, there we are. Have a debate there.
Again, I'm not taking a normative view, and I hope everyone here knows in the 10 years I've been working for Rabo, I'm a huge fan of Aussie farming and friend to Aussie farming. So everything I'm saying comes from a position of love. But the academic literature on free trade really is completely wrong. Completely wrong. Being technical, if you reread, technical moment just for a second between two guys who are neck deep in this. If you reread Smith and Ricardo with the parts we edit out, they argue against free trade. But you can't have global free trade if you don't have a global security order. And until you have a new global security order, we're not going to get one that we want. And unfortunately, that's all happening above all of our heads and our pay grades here, but it's not separate from the trading order. It's part and parcel of it. So there's nothing wrong with saying we need options. I agree with you completely on that. And I think if you're an Aussie farmer and you have the option of making money from China, take it. But as someone was saying to me this week, one of my clients down here, it's the cream in our coffee. It's not our coffee. I think if you can manage it to that degree, so it's a balance sheet boost in good times, but isn't a massive balance sheet hit in bad times, which can and will come, as we've seen, then that's probably a better way to look at the sustainability of that relationship until we have a new global security order, which we can't do if, as we're agreeing, we now have rising great powers who are reverting back to what is the norm, and I stress, the norm in long-run history. Long-run history is not everyone's weak, America is strong, and we all do what they say, and we have an American and European-centric global trading order and one set of rules for everyone. The long-run history of mankind is different groups of people saying, we want a set of rules that work better for us than for you. We're going to use what we've got to get them, like Vladimir Putin, and the rest of you are going to like it or lump it, or I fire a nuke at you. And we have to accept that until we can get to a new stability, and we're nowhere near one, we have to be much more risk cognizant in terms of how we look at our trading relationships.
In a minute, we can talk about how we know we're at stability, because I was going to ask you that earlier, but Shiro, let me give you a chance first to reply. Is that you agree or disagree with that?
There's no doubt that the security order is necessary, at least some stability there for an economic order. They're intricately linked. I think my worry would be, though, that we can't sit around and wait for a new security equilibrium. We're in an order transition. I think you'd agree. I think we'd all agree. Now, how to manage that transition depends, I think, importantly on the economic order. We've been given this system and order where a fundamental principle is equal treatment through most favoured nation status. And that equal treatment diffuses economic risk and therefore diffuses political risk. And that's really important, I think, going forward. And the economic order is under threat, but I said, it's still functioning. The two great powers have not walked away from it. The United States, despite its problems, has still not walked away from it. The Chinese have even signed up to this multi-party interim arbitration arrangement, long acronym, but we all know, I think, in this room, that's what held the Chinese to account. The rules are enforceable between Australia and China and about 25 or so other economies. The Chinese have a stake in this system, and I think it's incumbent on us to continue to wrap the Chinese economy and any other economy, large economy, in rules and markets for security.
Very good. So in your presentation earlier, you were talking about the shifting sands, and we're sitting on them and have said that it's not a good time. But yes, looking back, at what point are we going to feel that it is a good time? What would be the triggers for someone like Sam that's saying, well, when am I supposed to sit around and wait until there's peace and Putin and whoever's coming after Biden say, yep, it's all good now?
Well, let me try and clarify what I just said if it's been misinterpreted. I'm not saying don't do business. I'm not saying there aren't fantastic opportunities out there. In fact, I said very clearly, in every downside there's an upside. But it's in recognizing that hopes for an integrated, three-decimal place, law-based international system are wonderful. Keep that to one side, but don't presume that's going to be the normal. I mean, in China, for example, they're a Marxist-Leninist economy. Any international agreement China signs is flexible depending on whether it wants to abide by it or not at any given moment. We all know that. And when they don't need to, they won't. So
the track record's been a bit different, hasn't it?
Well, it depends on which area you're looking at. But the broad picture absolutely is one of you need to be cognizant of the risks. So if you can get into a position where you have a great product, which Australia does, and you've got a great importer, and you can make that deal, and it's cream in your coffee, as I said, absolutely take it. But if it's all cream, that's all your cream, there is no coffee, then you run the risk that several agri producers here have seen over the past couple of years, that things can get very, very rocky. So that's going to be the norm for years and years. I'll only be in a position where I say, okay, we're all done, when finally everyone understands which geography they're kind of boss of, and which kind of trading relationships we have between them. And in the Middle East, we are very, very, very far from that, with real-world impacts that will flow through to agri-producers here in Brazil, America, everywhere. And we've got to get past some real hurdles on that front, very short term, before we can start thinking about the technicalities of it again.
Excellent. Now, there's one question from the audience that I'd like to have everyone discuss. It's about the companies that conduct Australian global trade are often local branches of multinational companies. Sam, you're a small fish in a big pond, I would expect. So does that create risk for Australian producers like Sam or even larger Australian corporations?
I think one of the realities for a lot of people in this room who are from farms is that there's production systems behind all these, and we're already juggling a whole lot of factors, including climatic, to try and turn product off every year. And you look at the big guys. There's a boom and bust mentality in our industry, and you look at the processors now that have got the run of it, and the farmers are having a tough time, particularly on the livestock side. And so you look at a national like multinational like JBS, and they've got the ability to offset their US operations that are now quickly falling into negative territory with their Australian ones that are doing really well. And so you look at, from our business perspective, the bottleneck is quite often on the production side, and we've got huge multinationals that dominate that space. I don't know what the stat is, but it's got to be 60%, 70% of Australian processing is owned by multinational businesses, or at least very large businesses, and the expertise, or the businesses that aren't those are generational, and so they've got the ability to run a 5 to 10 year balance sheet rather than a year to year, and so it does take enormous grit to kind of be one of those guys, and as it does for farmers as well, because we see the swings. But that is the challenge, and one of the things that we've seen in the US over the last couple of years, that the Biden government has really put a lot of money into developing new abattoirs, and that is really interesting, because now they're running into, I'll probably talk about this later, but like they're 25, 26, 27 in terms of the cattle shortage in the US as they come out of drought. Yep. And a lot of those new processors, and we've dealt with some of these guys in the US that are new plants opening up. They've got China, like Beth, they've got China access in the blink of an eye. They can have it USDA inspected. Like, there's none of the rubbish that we have to go through here in Australia to get market access. But their standard production is much lower than ours. I wonder what's going to happen to those guys in the next 5 years, whether they're going to be swallowed by JBS or they're going to be shut down, and all that money the Biden government has pumped into that sector is going to be lost.
Yeah, so I wanted to find out what everyone's view in on that, how that's affecting Australia, whether it's something we should learn from, whether it is really putting us at a disadvantage. Any other thoughts?
I'll just add one quick thing if I can, Shiro. I think, and I look at Four Daughters, I look at other businesses that have come into this industry, I think that the small and medium-sized businesses can get huge penetration into different markets. So finding ways to get market access is a really important thing. We found our path through a cooperative on the North Coast called NCMC, Casino Abattoir, and we're very lucky to get a kill there. Must have been 2012. And if it wasn't for operations like that gave you a gateway in, it's bloody near impossible.
Yeah. You're nodding your head a lot, Shiro.
Well, it's really interesting, and so, you know, I'm obviously an academic in my ivory tower watching this happen, but the importance of foreign investment, right, for market links, for technology, for know-how. I think too often the community concern rightly is that, they're buying up our farms or they're buying up our assets, but I think we have to recognise the opportunities. It's not just capital, but it is the market links, and then to, whether it's in mining or agriculture, to identify what the risks are that we're worried about and concentrate on regulating and mitigating those risks. So it's even with other assets in our economy that we're instinctively, the community is worried about foreign ownership of data assets and so forth. I think we have to think about where the risk is and how we can reap the benefits without letting the risks overwhelm the foreign investment. So I think that story that Sam tells is excellent. It makes so much sense, right? And why would we want to close off to that when we can? It's all about getting our own institutions right and getting our own regulations right, I think.
Excellent. Now, we've already talked about who you see as the main market set for your business and what you're looking at, and the EU didn't feature on that list, but here at the conference in the past few days, the EU trade deal has dominated conversation. So I think this is for everyone. Is this something that is going to open opportunity for producers here? what are the weaknesses? The NFF has vocally said currently it's a dud deal. And do we care if it's not a major market that's going to make that big of a difference?
I can just speak very vaguely on the EU stuff, and I just say from a production perspective, it's a hard market. You're either in or you're out. And from a backgrounding and a feedlotting perspective, it's difficult to run that concurrently with other systems, and so that makes it hard. And I'm not across the EU deal at all, but that from a producer perspective is hard.
Beth, do you have any insight in terms of where producers and the industry wants it to be and where it is now?
Absolutely. I mean, I think the Agriculture Department and the agricultural interest is top of mind for us. The government has obviously committed to a commercially meaningful outcomes, and we've acknowledged that more work needs to be done to deliver a commercially meaningful outcome on our agricultural products in particular. I mean, I haven't been personally engaged on the EU process, so I can't speak with any authority on it. All I can say is that the reason Nicola Hinder's not here today is she's obviously on flight to Osaka as we speak, and so I think that points to the seriousness that we take from an agricultural trade issue to make sure that we've got the best person there to put that perspective on the table.
Excellent. And
it's a bit ironic that we're doing the deal in Osaka if we do it, one of the most protected, inefficient agricultural markets on the planet. But I think, if we don't get a deal that is good for farmers, it's more of a political trophy. And this we have to avoid. It's a huge missed opportunity. And without knowing the details, but if that's what the NFF is saying, I'll listen to what the NFF is saying.
excellent. Michael, do you have
I defer to the others. I don't have any view.
What I wanted to find out as well, one of the questions we talked about is sustainability measures and requirements. So that is something that the EU is pushing very strongly, but potentially other markets are not. And I don't know whether you can talk on this, Shiro. Is that something that we all need to be cognizant of, that it's going to be required by all markets eventually?
Well, I hope not. We should push back on that strongly. I mean, some of it is, of course, legitimate from the European Union, but a lot of it is protectionist, right?
I agree on that.
Thank you.
I completely agree on that, and there'll be a lot more.
Yeah, and there are places to push our sustainability interests through APEC and through COP and other forums, and even in things like the Singapore Green Economy Agreement. So I think this is where we do need to work with partners like in APEC to push back on some of this protectionism from the European Union.
Well, you're very confident on that. There's purely protectionist moves. Where else will we see it?
On the sustainability side?
Yes.
Well, I think some of it's well-intentioned. I mean, working for a European bank, I can tell you there's a religious zeal for it there. So part of it, I think, is that. But, the Dutch, we're a Dutch bank, absolutely free traders to their core in their history. And yet, when I ask my colleagues, vis-a-vis Chinese auto exports to Europe, where 1 in 10 jobs will go if the trend we see now continues for another few years, and well-paid jobs, not low-end jobs. Are you in favour of tariffs now that they've taken European technology and reversed engineered it and sold it back to you cheaper? Everyone said yes. So everyone tends to be a free trader when they're an exporter, and not when they're not. And that's part of my point.
Excellent. So overall, if you could give a rating of how well Australia does do at selling our produce to the world, how would you rate our efforts? And are there others that are better at doing it than us? Anyone can jump in there. Sam, can I put you on the spot?
Sure. I think New Zealand's been terrific in managing their political landscape over the last 5 years when we've felt like we've probably struggled. And I think they also take a really good story, which Australia has got as well. I just don't feel that we've been as aligned in some of our promotion. And in saying that, Australia's produce has got a fantastic place in the global market. It just maybe hasn't had some of the right, and maybe goes back to having some of those more small and medium-sized businesses promoting it to the world. But I don't feel it's always had the right people there.
Excellent. Beth, do you?
I could probably just comment that, I mean, I think we should be proud of Australia's sustainability record. I mean, we are focused on it from a government perspective in terms of how we actually engage and promote that into the world stage, and particularly from the perspective of equivalence, right? And I spoke before about the no one size fits all, and you know, one of the concerns I've seen come through is an assumption that you need to be benchmarking reductions. We already benchmark very well in a lot of areas, and so what we need to be arguing for is appropriateness of measures, rather than sort of holding ourselves to an arbitrary benchmark that we've probably already well exceeded, and having the data available to support that. I think just in terms of, you know, some of the things that we have been doing, we have our Special Representative for Australian Agriculture, Ms Sue McCluskey. She's been very active at being out there engaging on all of the good things we already do. And I think we just need to continue to build on that and continue to maintain our position that, you know, we have great credentials, and it's not necessarily about reduction or regulation. It's about demonstrating the equivalence and the fit-for-purposeness of those measures.
Excellent. Shiro?
Yeah, I don't think we should underestimate how important we are in feeding the world, how we keep the lights on with our raw material exports in Northeast Asia, for example. And I think there's a question here on sovereign capability. You know, if we start to subsidise, if we start to try to onshore, that's a huge diversion of resources. It's going to make everything more expensive for our farmers and exporters. And we've got to be pretty careful about that, I think. So we are efficient and we're good at what we do because of the lack of protection and the lack of subsidies. If we're going to subsidise anything, it should be research, R&D into drought-resistant crops and whatever have you.
Excellent. And let's end with you, Michael. You might force you to be a
I
positive.
won't get into that stoush again, but I vote with my pocket and I buy Aussie produce when I'm living up in Asia. So there you go.
There you go. That is a huge positive. Well done. Thank you to all of the panel. I think that is us out of time. But good luck. Let's hope that, yes, the EU trade deal delivers something, but also that those shifting sands eventually stabilize. Sooner the better. Thank you.